All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to dive into something today. It's a topic that seems like it's always in the headlines these days, but huh, it's rarely ever understood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Fascism.
Mm-hmm.
We asked you all to send in some sources, and wow, did you all deliver? We got some really, really interesting stuff, and I think you could be surprised by how much more there is to this whole concept than just those simple labels everybody likes to throw around, like, oh, it's just authoritarian or just like, right wing or something.
Yeah. I mean, fascism, it's a term that gets thrown around so much these days, like it's lost all meaning.
Yeah, it's just a buzzword now.
Yeah. So to like really grasp what it means, I think we got to go back to, its historical roots.
Okay, so let's go back. Let's start with the basics then.
Yeah.
Like, what is fascism? Historically speaking.
Well, historically speaking, the only real example of a true fascist state was Benito Mussolini's Italy
Oh.
from 1922 to 1943. And this wasn't just like some random dictatorship or something. This was like a whole movement based on a very specific ideology.
Hmm.
And at the core of that ideology was this idea that that they needed to put the needs of the collective, the nation like above the needs of the individual.
So, okay, so, a lot of people, they like to label any kind of right-leaning ideology as, like, fascist. Is that even accurate?
Not really, no. I mean, yeah, there are some movements that do share similarities with fascism,
Right.
like, National Socialism in Germany or Imperial Japan. But they're really distinct entities.
Yeah.
They all have their own ideologies, their own motivations. But the one thing that really links them together is that emphasis on the collective.
Hmm.
That's really the common thread there.
That's interesting. It seems like this idea of the collective is like really crucial here.
Yeah, yeah. That's
Could you like unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. So in fascist Italy, the collective meant like the state.
Right.
But then in Nazi Germany, it was more about like the racial community.
Right.
In Imperial Japan, it was all about like upholding tradition.
Oh.
And then, you even have movements like the Romanian Iron Guard.
Mm.
It was a pretty far right movement back in the 1930s and 40s.
Yeah.
And for them, the collective, it was like all defined by religious identity.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, I mean, each movement kind of conceived of the collective a little bit differently, but they all shared this belief that individual interests, they should, take a back seat to the needs of the group.
So it's not necessarily about like, totally getting rid of individual rights or anything like that.
Right.
It's more about just kind of like shifting the balance.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about, framing the individual's like whole purpose, their whole existence even, in relation to the larger group. That's the key thing there.
Hmm. That's fascinating. Now, our sources, they also pointed out something kind of interesting. It's a connection between these movements and totalitarianism. Like, what's the link there?
Oh, that's a really important point. A lot of the sources that you send in, they argue that it's that collectivist focus, especially when you combine it with like a secular foundation,
Mm-hmm.
that can make these movements really vulnerable to totalitarianism.
I see.
It's like, think about it this way.
Okay.
When the state, when it derives its legitimacy, like solely from worldly sources, things like popular will, control of the military, or like a specific ideology,
Right.
that can lead to like a really unchecked concentration of power.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a recipe for, for disaster.
So essentially, like these very movements that are, they say they want to prevent chaos and societal breakdown and all that,
Right.
they could actually end up creating the very things that they're trying to avoid.
Yeah, it's kind of a tragic irony, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the sources that you sent, they highlight how, in trying to create order, these regimes, they could actually become just as oppressive as the socialist states they often opposed.
Wow.
So it really underscores the dangers of unchecked power, regardless of, whatever ideology is behind it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit here. Let's talk about Mussolini's later regime,
Okay.
the Italian Social Republic.
Right.
Did that follow the same kind of ideological blueprint as his earlier regime?
Interestingly, no.
Really?
A lot of the sources seem to suggest that the Republic, it actually kind of veered away from traditional fascist ideology.
Mm.
It was really like the intense cult of personality around Mussolini that became like the defining feature.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so, instead of the state serving the collective good, it was really structured to serve Mussolini himself, and the people, they were just expected to fall in line. It really was kind of a perversion of that original concept of, a traditionalist state.
So even within Italy itself, we see this kind of divergence,
Yeah.
from what we understand as true fascism.
Exactly. And that's why, using fascism as like a blanket term for any, authoritarian regime is just it's so problematic.
Right.
These movements, while they share, some features, they also had their own unique characteristics, their own motivations. So to really understand them, we got to move beyond those simple labels.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes total sense. So uh, this brings us to kind of a crucial question then. Like, why is it so important to understand these, like, nuances,
Hmm.
especially, in the world today?
Well, I think, carelessly throwing around that term fascism, it just prevents us from having real, meaningful conversations about what's going on in politics today, current political trends.
Right. Yeah.
I think if we understand the historical complexities of fascism, then we can better assess, whether that label is actually being used accurately or if it's just being used as like a rhetorical weapon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To, like, shut down debate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Okay,
This
cool.
has been a really fascinating deep dive. I've learned a lot.
Yeah, this is good.
And for you listening, we're going to leave you with this. How does understanding, like, the true nature of fascism, how does that help us interpret what's going on around us, the political landscape? And also, what distinguishes genuine fascist tendencies from other forms of authoritarianism? That's something to think about. And was he going to say?
See you to stay.